Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And just following up on my colleague from Oregon's line of questioning, I appreciate her saying, and we appreciate you being here with us today.
Thank you.
This about the science advisory boards, and there's serious concern that the EPA's regulatory science has become somewhat of a closed loop, that the agency sets regulatory goals based on whatever motives those goals are based upon, and then develops the funds and the science that it needs to justify those goals. The agency then creates its own regulations and is solely responsible for interpreting those regulations. Making matters even worse, the courts largely defer to the EPA, especially when questions involve the analysis of science. Therefore, the most critical requirement for America to trust this regulatory policy or system, and especially the regulations that are set forth by the EPA, is scientific integrity. Unfortunately, as I say, there are worries, and we, at least I believe, there seems to be some very serious reasons for being worried about this being a closed loop. A closed loop is not going to give us the type of science that we need. We believe that especially this is evident in a matter that you were just discussing with my colleague from Oregon, the independent peer review of EPA science, and we believe, and I'd like to ask you a few questions about whether or not this has been compromised. You are responsible for appointing members of the EPA scientific advisory boards, and let's take a look. Science advisory boards, such as, number one, the Science Advisory Board and the Clean Air, number two, the Clean Air Science Advisory Committee. Mm-hmm. And you have called these panels independent review boards. Mm-hmm. And your predecessor described them as being made up totally of independent expert scientists. And that's pretty well what you still agree with. You're acknowledging that that's still what your goal is and what we're trying to do. I would like to put into the record some information prepared by the Congressional Research Service that calls into serious question the independence of the experts that sit on these committees.
Without objection, be made a part of the record.
According to CRS, almost 60% of the members of these two panels have received EPA grants since 2000. That's totaling taxpayer-funded grants worth roughly $140 million. Perhaps even worse, a majority of the members of the Clean Air Science Advisory Committee, the panel tasked with critically evaluating the EPA's particulate matter standards that was finalized at the end of 2012, had received, so a majority had received EPA grants directly related to particulate matter since 2010. So you have someone investigating or passing judgment on things that they themselves have been given grants and been involved in the research they're supposedly overseeing. The Administrator, and Mr. Administrator, in the past we have heard EPA witnesses express the point of view that scientists who have received EPA grants are somewhat immune from any potential conflicts associated with these grants that they're involved with or future grants. Do you consider that the recipient of EPA grants, do you consider that if someone has actually been involved and had a grant and done study about something they're supposed to now review, that would compromise that person's ability to have an independent judgment?
No, not in and of itself, as long as we have procedures to ensure that they're fair-minded, that they're there because of their expertise.
Well, fair-minded just means that they don't have any bias. We're talking about a built-in bias here. You're trying to say that somebody who has already been given a grant and has reached conclusions is someone that we can then trust to have an unbiased view after we've paid them in order to have a biased view.
Mr. Chairman, we understand that there have been concerns expressed about that. We also understand that others have expressed concern about having people who are in an industry that we're discussing that would be impacted.
That's correct. That's something someone would be concerned about.
But
you think government employees are immune from the same sort of bias that you would find in industry?
No, I'm not saying they're immune, sir. I'm saying that we have a process in which we rigorously pursue those issues to ensure that they're there to represent their expertise and that the panel is balanced, that it's fair, it meets all requirements, ethical requirements,
isn't balance. The question is whether there are members who are involved, sometimes at very high levels, and guiding the direction of those panels who actually have a built-in bias in that they've already been granted grants to make a conclusion before you now are asking them for an unbiased conclusion. And in fact, sometimes, Madam Administrator, they're asked to give assessments of their own work. In other words, we're now paying someone to give an unbiased assessment of something that is his or her work.
The gentleman's time has expired.